Welcome to the silent horror, where the shadows speak and the silence tells the most chilling stories. If you're ready to dive into spine-tingling tales that will keep you up at night, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the family of horror lovers. Grab a seat, stay tuned, and prepare to be haunted. The sound of a heartbeat echoes through the silence. A lone figure stands at the edge of a cliff, staring into the void below. Her hands tremble, clenching the letter she's held for years. It's time. With one final breath, she whispers, "I'm sorry." The wind carries her words into the empty air, but they'll never reach the one person who needs to hear them most. She closes her eyes, knowing that some regrets are too heavy to ever let go. Isla stood at the window, her eyes fixed on the steady rain falling outside. The world seemed muted, like it was holding its breath. Her apartment, nestled in the heart of the city, had always been a sanctuary. It was the place where she could escape the noise of the world, the place where she could simply breathe. But today, something was different. Something felt off. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her out of her thoughts. She wiped a few stray strands of hair from her face, crossed the room, and picked it up. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said cautiously, not expecting anyone she knew to be calling. There was a long pause before a voice, smooth and rich, came through the speaker. "Isla, right?" "Yes. Who is this?" She furrowed her brow, her fingers tightening around the phone, as a knot of unease began to form in her stomach. "My name is Evelyn Dreadmore," the voice continued, calm but with a hint of something cryptic, something alluring. "I represent Dreadmore Manor. You've been selected to join us for an exclusive event." Isla's heart skipped a beat. The name Dreadmore was both familiar and unsettling, like a half-remembered nightmare. She had never heard of a Dreadmore Manor, but there was something in the tone of Evelyn's voice that made her curious, despite the growing unease inside her. "What kind of event?" Isla asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "A gathering," Evelyn replied, "for those who seek answers. A chance to confront the things they cannot escape. You'll be joining a small group of others who have been invited to Dreadmore Manor. Your invitation awaits." Isla opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She was struck by an odd sense of dread, a feeling like she was being drawn into something beyond her control. Yet at the same time, there was something almost magnetic about it, something that whispered to her that she needed to go. Evelyn's voice broke the silence again. "Isla, we have been watching you. Your journey has brought you here, whether you realize it or not. You need this, just as much as we need you." Isla's fingers tingled, as if an invisible force had reached through the phone, gripping her. She had no idea what Evelyn was talking about, but there was something about the words that felt too real, too intimate. Isla started, but Evelyn's voice cut through her hesitation. "Come to Dreadmore Manor. Everything you need to know will be revealed. Trust that you're meant to be there. There is no turning back once you accept the invitation." Evelyn's tone softened, almost coaxing, but there was something final about her words. Without waiting for a reply, the line went dead. Isla stared at the phone in her hand, the silence now overwhelming. She felt dizzy, like the air itself had thickened around her, heavy with something unknown. For a long moment she stood there, caught in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Her mind raced, wondering if the call was some kind of prank or worse, some kind of scam. But the tone in Evelyn's voice, the certainty, the calmness, had unsettled her in a way she couldn't ignore. Against her better judgment, Isla sat down at her small desk, grabbing her laptop and typing in the name Dreadmore Manor. The screen flickered to life and she quickly scrolled through the search results. But all she found were a handful of vague mentions, old newspapers articles, forum posts, and historical references, none of which gave her concrete answers. There was no official website for Dreadmore Manor, nothing that confirmed the existence of such a place. But the more she searched, the deeper the unease grew. She had a sense, deep in her gut, that there was something about this place that she should have known, something that connected to her own past in a way she couldn't quite place. Minutes turned into hours. She closed the laptop in frustration, letting out a shaky breath. Whatever was happening, whatever this invitation was about, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow tied to her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. She opened it hesitantly. "Your invitation has been delivered." Isla's pulse quickened. She hadn't heard anyone at the door. She wasn't expecting any packages. The message included a time and an address, but the words that followed chilled her to the bone. "Arrive at midnight. The journey begins at dusk. You are not alone." Her mind reeled, confusion giving way to a sharp sense of panic. She thought about the phone call, the cryptic invitation, the ominous message. And she thought about how her own life had begun to feel like a series of events leading her to this moment. Her instincts screamed at her to ignore it, to block the number and forget about Dreadmore Manor. But another part of her, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries, to things unknown, was already making the decision. She would go. She needed to go. She didn't understand why, but she knew it was no coincidence that she had received the call. There was a reason. And maybe, just maybe, this was the answer to a question she had never asked aloud. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour. But as Isla looked out the window one last time, she saw something that made her heart skip in her chest. A shadow, standing at the edge of the street, facing her apartment building. Isla's breath caught in her throat. She was sure no one had been there before. Her phone buzzed again. "Midnight, don't be late." The rain hadn't let up by the time Isla left her apartment. The downpour seemed endless, a relentless cascade of water that blurred the world outside. The streets were empty, their usual hustle drowned under the oppressive silence. Isla's footsteps echoed as she crossed the city, heading toward the address from the mysterious message. The closer she got, the more uneasy she felt. There was no logical explanation for why she was doing this. No rational reason why she should be driving to an unknown estate in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night. But despite the knots in her stomach, a strange sense of inevitability hung over her, as if something had drawn her here long before she had even received the invitation. The directions on her phone had taken her out of the city and onto winding, narrow roads, each turn more desolate than the last. She had passed few cars, and each one seemed to disappear as quickly as it appeared, vanishing into the black void of the night. The world outside the car was a blur of rain and shadows, the headlights slicing through the darkness, but revealing nothing. Finally, after what felt like hours, Isla reached the gates. They were old, rusted, and barely standing. The Dreadmore estate loomed behind them, its silhouette casting long, jagged shadows across the overgrown grounds. The iron gates creaked open with a groan when she pressed the button on her car's dashboard, their sound cutting through the heavy silence like a warning. She took a deep breath and slowly drove through the gates, feeling a strange tension in the air, as if something ancient was watching her. The road was long, lined with towering trees whose twisted branches seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. Her headlights flickered once, twice, as if the car itself was uneasy about what lay ahead. The manor finally came into view, its Gothic spires rising above the trees like dark fingers reaching toward the sky. It looked as though it had been abandoned for decades, its stone walls covered in ivy, windows dark and empty. There was an undeniable aura of decay around the place, a heaviness that clung to the air. Isla parked the car at the foot of the long, cracked driveway, the sound of rain hitting the roof the only thing that seemed to exist. She sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in shallow bursts. The invitation had said, "Don't be late." But now that she was here, the words seemed like a cruel joke. What was she doing? She glanced at the time on her phone. 11:58 p.m. It was now or never. With a deep sigh, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain, the cold wetness immediately soaking through her clothes. She pulled her coat tighter around her body, the chill seeping into her bones. As she walked toward the front door, her footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of leaves that had gathered over the stone steps. When she reached the door, it opened before she could knock. A man stood there, his figure tall and shadowed, the dim light from the interior casting an eerie glow on his face. His features were sharp, his eyes piercing, but there was something unsettling about him, a coldness that radiated from his presence. "Miss Wright," he said in a voice so smooth it could have been made of silk. "We've been expecting you." Isla hesitated, her mind spinning with questions, but all she could manage was a tight nod. "Yes, Come in," he interrupted, stepping aside to let her enter. "You've arrived just on time. We wouldn't want you to miss the beginning." She stepped into the foyer, immediately struck by the stark contrast between the modern world she had left behind and the ancient, almost forgotten, atmosphere of the manor. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The floors were polished wood, and the furniture, though old, looked immaculately kept. But everything about the place felt wrong, as though it were frozen in time, locked in a moment that had long passed. "You must be tired from your journey," the man said, his voice almost soothing. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Gregory Dreadmore, and this is my family's estate." Isla didn't know how to respond. She had expected anything more, but it was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Gregory led her through the grand hall, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The walls were adorned with old portraits, their eyes following her as she walked past. The strange sense of being watched intensified with every step. There was a faint whispering in the air, too soft to make out the words, but distinct enough to make her skin prickle with unease. As they moved deeper into the manor, Isla noticed the other guests. She had imagined she would be alone, but she was far from it. There were 6 others gathered in a large room at the back of the house. Some were seated in plush chairs, others stood, talking quietly among themselves, but all of them fell silent. When she entered, she felt their eyes on her, curious, appraising. She had the distinct feeling that they had all been here before, that they had seen this place and its inhabitants through 1,000 different lenses. Gregory gestured toward the group. "Allow me to introduce the others. These are your fellow guests for tonight's event." Isla's gaze flickered over each face. There was a tall man in a dark suit, his eyes sharp and calculating. A woman in a red dress who looked as though she was lost in her own world, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. An older man, his face weathered and tired, stared into the fire with a haunted expression. There was a young couple, both of them pale and silent, their fingers intertwined as though afraid to let go. And then there was the woman in black, a figure who stood apart from the rest, her back straight and unmoving as though she were carved from stone. "Please," Gregory said, his voice drawing Isla's attention back to him. "Make yourself comfortable. The evening will begin shortly." Isla took a tentative step forward, her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far beyond her control, something that had been waiting for her. And somehow she knew she would never leave Dreadmore Manor the same. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room as Isla took a seat in one of the large velvet chairs. The group of guests, strangers to her, remained silent, their eyes casting occasional glances in her direction. But no one spoke. The atmosphere was heavy, like something was waiting to break the silence, but no one dared to begin. Isla shifted, uncomfortably, tugging at the sleeves of her coat as she stole a glance at the others in the room. Gregory Dreadmore, who had welcomed her into the estate, stood near the mantelpiece, his hands clasped behind his back as though he were observing a delicate piece of art. His eyes scanned the room, cold and calculating, as if he were waiting for something to unfold. The woman in the red dress, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, let out a soft sigh and stood. Her dark hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves, and her expression was distant, as though she were somewhere far away. "I thought we were supposed to talk," she said, her voice carrying an edge of impatience. "What is this? Why are we here?" Her words broke the uneasy silence, but the room still felt thick with tension. The others shifted slightly in their seats, but no one answered her question. Gregory remained still, his face expressionless, but his eyes seemed to flicker with something, perhaps amusement, or perhaps something darker. The woman in red stepped closer to the fire, the flames casting a warm glow on her skin. "I'm Evelyn," she said, her voice softer now but still tinged with a note of frustration. "And I don't like being kept in the dark. We all received invitations, but none of us know why we're here." The old man by the fire let out a soft grunt, his voice gravelly as he spoke. "This is Dreadmore Manor, child. You'll learn soon enough why you're here." Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "And you are?" The man chuckled, but the sound was dry, like the scraping of gravel. "They call me Arlo. I've been here before. I've learned more than I wanted to know." There was a shift in the room as Evelyn turned to face him, her lips curling into a faint smile. "And what did you learn, Arlo?" Arlo's eyes glinted. In the firelight, his wrinkled face pulled into a grimace. "That Dreadmore has a way of claiming people. You can't just leave once you've stepped inside. It has a hold on you whether you like it or not." A cold chill swept through the room despite the warmth of the fire. The other guests fell silent, their eyes darting around as if waiting for something. Or someone. "I don't think we have much choice in the matter." The young man sitting next to Evelyn spoke up, his voice soft but clear. He was tall, with a nervous energy about him, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "We're here now. It's not like we can leave." The woman dressed entirely in black, who had yet to speak, finally shifted in her chair. Her eyes were wide, and, despite the stoic look on her face, there was an unmistakable tremor in her hands. "I've seen it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a strange mixture of fear and awe. "I've seen the shadows that haunt this place, the souls that are trapped here." Isla's heart raced. She turned her gaze toward the woman, trying to make sense of her words, but the woman merely lowered her head, her dark hair falling to obscure her face. "Quiet, Estelle." Gregory Dreadmore's voice was smooth, but firm. "You're letting your imagination run wild. The house does that to some." But Isla could see it in Estelle's eyes. She wasn't lying. The woman was afraid, and it wasn't just the manner that terrified her. It was something more. "I don't understand," Isla said, her voice finally breaking through the hushed conversation. "Why are we here? What is this place? Why did we receive the invitation?" The group's attention shifted to her, and for a brief moment, a heavy silence fell over the room. Gregory's eyes locked onto hers, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "The invitation," Gregory said slowly, as though weighing each word, "is not given lightly. Dreadmore Manor is no ordinary place. It draws those who are destined to be here. Each of you carries something, an event, a decision, a moment that has led you here. You may not understand why yet, but you will." Isla frowned, confused by his words. "What do you mean, destined?" she asked, the word heavy with a sense of finality that she couldn't grasp. Gregory's smile widened slightly, though it did not reach his eyes. "You'll come to understand soon enough, all in good time." Before Isla could ask more, the old man Arlo let out a dry laugh. "Good time? There's no good time here, girl. It's all bad time." The woman in black, Estelle, shuddered, as if recalling something painful. "The house makes you confront your deepest fears. It tests you, pushes you until you break. But you can't escape, not until it's done with you. Some people leave, but they're never really free." Isla felt a cold rush of air brush against her skin, though the room was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the shadows seemed to stretch longer, growing taller around her. She glanced around the room, searching the faces of the other guests. There was something in their eyes, a shared experience, something they had all gone through. But no one was speaking. Gregory Dreadmore finally spoke again, his voice like velvet. "Tonight we begin. Each of you will face your first trial, and you will either pass it, or you will not." The words hung in the air like a heavy shroud. Isla felt her stomach churn, her nerves tightening like a fist in her chest. "Trial?" she asked, barely able to find her voice. Gregory's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "A trial to see if you are worthy of leaving, or if you will remain, as we all do." Before Isla could respond, the lights in the room flickered once, then went out completely. A deep, guttural sound filled the air, something like a low growl coming from somewhere deep within the house. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound that no living creature should be able to make. And then, silence. Isla's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. The others remained still, their faces hidden in the dark. She couldn't see them anymore, but she could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting. And then from the darkness came a voice, so soft, so clear it sent chills down her spine. "You can't leave. Not yet." The words echoed in the darkness, a reminder that this place was no longer just a manor. It was a prison. The silence in the room stretched long after the strange, guttural growl had faded into the walls. Isla's breath was shallow, her heart hammering in her chest. The darkness seemed to press in on her, heavy and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. She could hear her pulse in her ears, could feel the weight of the other guests' gaze, even if she couldn't see them in the pitch-black darkness. A candle flickered to life, casting a soft glow over the room. The fire in the hearth had gone out, and the only light now came from the faint, trembling flame of a single candle that sat at the center of the room. The wax dripped slowly, staining the wooden table it rested upon. Isla's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she could make out the shapes of the others. Estelle, Arlo, Evelyn, the young couple, and Gregory Dreadmore. All of them were standing, now their faces hidden in shadow but their bodies tense and alert. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. Without warning, Gregory's voice cut through the stillness. "The trial begins now," he said, his words like a whisper. "Of silk, You will all be tested, each of you in your own way. What you face will be unique to you, as it is with everyone who walks through these doors. Isla's throat went dry. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to ask what the trial was, what it meant. But the question felt impossible, locked away behind some invisible barrier. Gregory raised his hand, and the candle flickered violently before going out completely. The room plunged into darkness once more, and a sense of cold seeped into her bones. The air seemed to thicken, the pressure building until it was almost unbearable. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Someone was moving in the dark, close to her, and her skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. She felt her breath quicken, her pulse pounding in her ears. A voice, low and menacing, broke the silence. Isla Wright. She froze. The voice, her name, came from just beyond the shadows. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from, but it felt so close, like a whisper right in her ear. Her stomach twisted into a tight knot. Yes, her voice came out barely above a whisper, trembling with fear she couldn't control. The voice didn't respond immediately, but the weight of its presence pressed down on her, suffocating her. Then finally it spoke again, and this time, it was more of a command. Face your fear, Isla. Let it consume you. Before she could react, a cold, icy wind rushed through the room, sending a chill through her bones. It was like the very air had turned against her. She gasped, instinctively, clutching her arms around herself as if she could protect herself from the growing cold, but there was no escape. And then, like a flash of lightning in the night, images flooded her mind. Terrifying, vivid, impossible images. A dark alley, rain, shadows closing in on her, the distant sound of footsteps, hurrying, chasing. She turned, down the alley, her legs moving as though they were caught in thick mud. But no matter how fast she ran, they were always behind her, always too close. Then, the sudden flash of a face, familiar, but twisted in an expression of rage. The face of someone she had known once, someone she had loved. Why did you leave? Me? The voice screamed at her, and the words echoed through her mind, clawing at her sanity. Her heart pounded in her chest as the image of the face of her sister, ripped through her thoughts. The world seemed to collapse around her, leaving only that moment, that unbearable moment when her sister had disappeared from her life, never to be found again. The sound of footsteps grew louder, the echo of them filling her head. She was drowning in them, suffocating under the weight of her own memories. Isla stumbled back, her legs buckling beneath her as the fear threatened to consume her whole. Her eyes widened in panic as she searched for a way out, but the room seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in tighter. Then, a voice, cold and cruel, cut through the darkness. You abandoned her. You left her to die. Isla gasped for air, the words searing through her chest. Her sister, she had never talked about it, never confronted it. The guilt, the regret, it was all there, raw and exposed in the most painful way possible. I didn't mean to. Isla choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The image of her sister's face twisted, contorting in fury, and then it vanished, leaving nothing but a suffocating emptiness. The air around her grew still again, the temperature dropping even further. She felt as though she were sinking into an abyss, unable to escape. The weight of the memory was too much. But just as quickly as it had come, the feeling dissipated, leaving her gasping in the dark. She didn't know how long she had been standing there, trembling, her body soaked in sweat despite the freezing cold. She could barely breathe, could barely think. The trial had begun. and now she was paying the price. The light returned suddenly, blinding her, and she squinted, shielding her eyes as the candle flickered back to life. Her hands were shaking violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wasn't alone. The others were staring at her now, their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and something darker. But no one said a word. The room was eerily silent, save for the faint crackling of the fire. Gregory Dreadmore's voice broke the quiet. Isla has faced her first trial. She has confronted her greatest fear, her own guilt, her own regret. Isla swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. She wanted to scream, to ask what was happening, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no control over the nightmare that had just unfolded before her eyes. "You all will face your own trial in time," Gregory continued, his tone cold, almost detached. "But remember, there is no escaping your past. Here, it will find you." Isla felt her legs give way beneath her, and she collapsed onto the chair behind her, her body trembling violently. Her hand still shook as she wiped her face, trying to banish the image of her sister's face, twisted in rage and accusation. "You will never be the same," Gregory's voice echoed. "Not after tonight." Isla wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, just like the others. There was no escape from Dreadmore Manor. Not now. Not ever. Isla sat in the chair, her body still trembling, her mind racing. The room around her seemed distant, as though she were floating just outside of reality. The sting of her sister's face, the accusation, the guilt still hung heavily in the air, thick and suffocating. The others in the room remained silent, watching her with expressions that ranged from pity to cold indifference. No one spoke. No one moved. Isla wiped her face with trembling hands, trying to compose herself. But every time she closed her eyes, the image of her sister's accusing face resurfaced. It was as if she could feel the anger emanating from the dark corners of the room. The heavy silence was finally broken by Gregory's voice, smooth and calm, as though nothing had just occurred. "Each of you will face your own trial in turn. It is not a choice. It is a necessity." His voice, though gentle, held an undeniable weight, a certainty that left no room for argument. The house will test you. Your fears will be brought to the surface. Your past will be dredged from the depths, and you will either face it or be consumed by it. Isla glanced up at him, trying to steady her breath. "Consumed by it?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. Gregory's smile never faltered. "The trials are designed to break you, to force you to confront the deepest parts of yourself, those things you cannot escape. Many have walked these halls, and not all of them make it through. Some remain trapped." Isla's heart skipped a beat. "Trapped?" His eyes glinted, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked to the others in the room. "You will all follow your own paths through this night. Some of you will be tested immediately. Others will wait. But be warned, there is no escaping the house once you've begun." The air around Isla seemed to thicken with every word he spoke, and she felt the weight of the others' gaze on her once again. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting to see what would happen next, what she would do next. "Shall we proceed?" Gregory asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Isla could barely form a response. She felt the last remnants of her courage slip away, like sand through her fingers. The overwhelming terror she had just experienced was still fresh, still raw, and the thought of facing another trial, of confronting whatever else the house had waiting for her, was almost too much to bear. But then, from the corner of the room, Arlo let out a rough laugh. "You don't have to tell us twice," he said, standing up slowly. His movements were deliberate, as if he had been expecting this. "I've been through worse. Let's get this over with." There was a shift in the room as everyone looked toward Arlo, his voice a strange comfort for some, though others seemed wary of him. He was no stranger to Dreadmore Manor. That much was clear. "I'll go first," he continued, a dark glint in his eyes. "Let's see what the house has in store for me." Before anyone could protest, Gregory stepped forward, blocking his path. "No one leaves until their trial begins," he said sharply. His voice was the final word, firm and resolute. Arlo's expression hardened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the rest of the group, his eyes lingering on Isla for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll go last then," Arlo muttered, his voice full of quiet resignation. He took a seat near the fire, eyes trained on the flickering flames, as though waiting for his turn in some twisted game. The room fell into another heavy silence. Gregory's eyes moved over each of them, lingering for a moment on Isla. "The house will choose who faces the trial next. You cannot escape it, you cannot delay it, the only way out is through." As he finished speaking, the room around them seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the walls creaked, and the faintest sound echoed through the manor, something distant but unmistakably alive. It was as if the house itself was stirring, waking from a long slumber. Suddenly, the floor beneath Isla's feet seemed to ripple, the wooden boards beneath her shifting, cracking open. A door, a hidden door, slowly revealed itself, right where the wall had been moments before. Her heart raced. The house was alive, she was sure of it now. "This is your path," Gregory said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "This door will lead you where you need to go. You must walk through it, or the trial will never end." Isla stood slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her again. The door seemed to call to her, beckoning her forward. Her feet moved on their own, as though they had a will of their own, and before she could think to resist, she found herself standing in front of the door. It was not a normal door. The wood was old, weathered, and dark, as though it had been untouched for centuries. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, twisted and arcane, their meaning lost to time. The door was adorned with a rusted handle that seemed to pulse, with an energy she couldn't understand. Isla reached for the handle, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cold metal. The moment she touched it, a jolt of electricity shot through her body, forcing her to pull her hand back with a gasp. She recoiled, unsure of what had just happened. Gregory's voice echoed in her mind the words he had spoken earlier. "You must walk through it, or the trial will never end," haunting her. There was no turning back. Taking a deep breath, she gripped the handle again, more firmly this time, and twisted it. The door groaned as it slowly opened, revealing a long, narrow corridor that stretched endlessly into the dark. The smell of damp earth and mildew flooded her senses. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. A deep, guttural sound rumbled in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. It was like the house itself was breathing. Without thinking, Isla stepped forward into the darkness. Tiwei. Door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, the sound reverberating through the corridor. She flinched but kept walking, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. She could hear whispers now, faint and indistinct, coming from all around her. The walls seemed to shift, like they were alive, pulsing with an unseen force. As she moved deeper into the labyrinth, the corridor seemed to stretch out before her, twisting and turning in impossible directions. No matter how far she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was going in circles, trapped in a maze of her own mind. She turned a corner and suddenly, The air grew colder. A figure materialized in front of her, standing motionless, in the dark. It was a woman, her sister. Isla's breath caught in her throat as she saw the familiar face, twisted in a silent scream, her eyes empty of all emotion. The woman reached out toward her, her fingers elongated like claws, and Isla froze in terror. Her sister's voice, once so familiar, now sounded hollow, distorted. "You abandoned me." The words echoed through the labyrinth, reverberating off the walls. Isla's knees buckled beneath her, and she fell to the ground, her hands trembling. In the cold, damp earth, the door to the labyrinth slammed shut again. She was trapped. The sound of the door slamming shut behind Isla echoed in her chest, heavy and unyielding. Her heart raced, blood pounding in her ears as she crouched low to the ground, trembling with cold and fear. The air was thick with a dampness that clung to her skin, and the oppressive darkness felt suffocating, as though it were alive and watching her. The figure in front of her, the twisted, lifeless form of her sister, stood motionless, its pale skin stretched tight across a skull that was too hollow, too empty. The eyes were wide, dark hollows that seemed to absorb the light, as if they had never seen the world at all. Her sister's mouth hung open in a silent scream. The edges of her lips curled into a grotesque mockery of a smile. Isla's throat tightened. She knew she should run, escape from the haunting vision before her. But her body refused to obey. The image was too real, too raw. The guilt that surged within her was like a tidal wave threatening to drag her under. "You abandoned me." The voice hissed again, the words curling around her like a noose. Isla flinched, her eyes squeezed. "Shut! This isn't real." This isn't real, she thought desperately, trying to convince herself. But deep down, she knew the truth. It wasn't just a vision. It was a manifestation of the very guilt she had buried for so long. The guilt over her sister's disappearance. The guilt over the last words they'd shared. Isla had never forgiven herself. She couldn't. Slowly, she forced herself to stand, her legs weak and unsteady. She dared not look at the figure before her again. It was too much. Too close to the truth. She had been running from it her whole life, and now there was nowhere to hide. The corridor around her seemed to shift again, as though the walls were closing in. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. Some were familiar, others strange. Some were comforting, others mocking. "Face it." The voice was sharp, commanding. "You cannot run from yourself." Isla's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face the labyrinth that stretched before her, twisting and spiraling into darkness. The path ahead seemed endless, like an eternal maze with no way out. She had to move forward. She had no choice. With shaky hands, she reached out and placed one foot in front of the other, stepping deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers louder. Her footsteps echoed in the tight, oppressive space, growing louder with each step until they were all she could hear. They pounded in her chest, reverberating through her skull. And then, a sudden flash of light. Isla gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling to the ground as the world around her shifted. The darkness receded, replaced by a warm golden light that spilled from a mirror in the center of the labyrinth. The frame was ornate, gilded, but the reflection staring back at her was not her own. It was a different version of herself, one with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Isla's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the reflection. The woman in the mirror was wrong. There was something fundamentally wrong about her, something unnatural. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale, like she had been drained of life. And the smile, It was a smile of mocking cruelty, a smile that sent a chill down Isla's spine. The figure in the mirror raised a hand, reaching toward her as if to grab her by the throat. Isla recoiled, stumbling back in horror. "You can never escape your past," the reflection whispered, its voice cold and unfeeling. "You are the one who condemned yourself." Isla's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She could feel the pressure building in her chest like a weight she couldn't shake off. The reflection in the mirror seemed to mock her, taunting her with her deepest fear. It was as if the mirror was showing her the person she feared she had become, the person she was running from. "You abandoned her." The words echoed again, louder this time, a venomous hiss in the air. Isla's knees buckled beneath her, and she sank to the floor, clutching her head in her hands. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. "What happened to you?" she thought, her mind spiraling into chaos. "Why didn't I try harder to find you? Why did I let you disappear?" The reflection in the mirror seemed to laugh, a low, cruel sound that reverberated through the labyrinth. "You were never good enough to save her. You never could have. She's gone, and it's all your fault." Isla screamed, the sound ripping from her throat as she staggered to her feet. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't care. The reflection's words were like daggers, each one stabbing into her soul. The guilt was unbearable, a weight that threatened to crush her completely. But then, as if on cue, the reflection in the mirror shifted. The twisted version of herself began to fade, replaced by a different image. Her sister's face appeared, but this time, it wasn't twisted in anger. It was peaceful, calm, almost forgiving. The light in the labyrinth softened, growing warmer. The whispers faded and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Isla blinked, unsure of what was happening. Had she imagined it all? Was this some kind of trick? She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes locked on the mirror. Her sister's reflection smiled at her, a soft, sad smile. And then, in a voice that was both gentle and firm, it spoke. "You didn't abandon me, Isla. You did the best you could. You're not to blame." The words were like a balm to her aching soul, but they didn't erase the pain. They didn't erase the guilt. She had to let it go. But could she? Could she ever forgive herself? Isla's breath was ragged as she stood before the mirror, staring at the reflection of her sister who had died, who had disappeared without a trace. She wanted to reach out, to touch the glass, but something stopped her. The reflection was fading once more, slipping back into the darkness, leaving only the empty void in the mirror. The labyrinth began to shift again, and the golden light dimmed, leaving her once more in the cold, oppressive dark. Isla stumbled back, her body still shaking. But there was something different now. The weight of her guilt still pressed down on her, but it wasn't as suffocating. The reflection, the words, it was a start. A painful, heart-wrenching start. But it was something, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. Maybe, just maybe, she could forgive herself. Isla staggered away from the mirror, her body trembling as the remnants of her sister's reflection faded into the cold darkness of the labyrinth. The walls seemed to close in around her, their shadowed edges stretching out like the fingers of some unseen beast. The air was thick with a damp chill that gnawed at her skin, but the weight in her chest felt somehow lighter, even if only slightly. The trial had not ended, not by a long shot. But perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to understand its nature. Her heart pounded as she moved deeper into the labyrinth. Each footfall echoed, sharp and lonely, reverberating in the confined space. The winding corridors twisted around her, and the smell of wet earth and decay clung to the air, making her stomach churn. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something or someone was lurking just beyond her sight, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Focus, she told herself. I have to stay focused. Isla's breath came in shallow, gasps as she pressed forward, her fingers brushing the stone walls for guidance. It felt like she was walking in circles, but she knew better than to question the path ahead. The house had already shown its power. The labyrinth was alive, and it would not let her escape until it had its say. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The floor seemed to lurch forward with an unsettling creak, and before Isla could take another step, the entire corridor twisted violently. The walls distorted, stretching and bending, the stone flickering like flames. She stumbled, her legs buckling as the world around her seemed to warp, her surroundings warping into impossible shapes. She barely caught herself, pressing her palms against the jagged stone walls for balance. The echoing whispers returned, louder this time, their voices hissing at her from the shadows. The words were too distorted, too faint, but they were there, just beyond her comprehension. They slithered into her mind, burrowing beneath her skin, crawling through her veins like poison. Not again, she thought desperately. I can't go through this again. And yet, as she rounded another sharp corner, she came face to face with something even worse than her own reflection. The walls seemed to open up into a vast, empty room. The air was thick with tension, and the very ground felt unstable. The room was circular, its edges disappearing into the darkness. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, an object. The light in the room was dim, flickering, but it was enough to see it clearly. It was a heart. Not a human heart, but a dark, pulsating thing, a mass of blackened veins and decayed flesh. It throbbed slowly, as though alive, and with each beat, the room seemed to shake with a low, rumbling vibration. The heart was surrounded by a black mist that rose in curling tendrils, like smoke from a fire that would never die. Isla took a hesitant step forward, her pulse racing. She felt an icy chill creeping up her spine, a sense of dread settling deep in her bones. The heart, it was calling to her. She could feel it pulling her, urging her to come closer. She had seen enough horrors tonight, but something about this felt different. Something about it felt like a test she could not ignore. The heart beat again, and with it the air thickened. The shadows in the room stretched longer, darker, as though they were alive. The whispers returned, louder now, their voices overlapping, one another in a cacophony of distorted sounds. It knows, Isla thought. It knows what I've done. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pulsing with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat. Isla reached out, her hand trembling, and she touched the surface of the pedestal. The moment her fingers made contact, with it the heart's beating intensified, its pulsation sending shockwaves through the air. The whispers swirled around her, sharp and disorienting. She could make out fragments of words now, fragments that made her stomach turn. You don't deserve peace. You can never forgive yourself. Your heart is black. Isla recoiled, pulling her hand back from the pedestal. Her mind raced. These weren't just the house's whispers. These were her own thoughts, twisted and amplified by whatever power this place had. The guilt, the regret, the terrible weight of everything she had carried with her for so long. It was all here. It was all in that heart, pulsing with dark energy. No. The word was barely a whisper on her lips. I won't let it control me. With a trembling breath, Isla stepped back, forcing herself to tear her eyes away from the heart. She knew she had to face it. She had to confront what it symbolized, But the thought of it was unbearable. What is this, she wondered. What does it want from me? The heartbeat quickened again, louder and more insistent. And then, for the first time, the heart stopped. Silence. For a split second, everything was still. The world around her seemed to hold its breath, the darkness pressing in closer, suffocating. And then, with terrifying suddenness, the heart burst open, sending shards of blackened flesh and bone scattering across the room. Isla cried out, stumbling backward. The pieces of the heart dissolved into the air, dissolving into a mist of dark smoke that seemed to twist and writhe, taking shape. From the smoke, a figure emerged. It was not human, a grotesque mass of shadow and twisted limbs, its body shifting and contorting as it moved toward her. The face, if it could be called a face, was an amalgamation of terrible, broken things. Eyes that bulged and distorted, a mouth that split too wide, lips stretching with an unnatural grin. The figure hovered inches from the ground, its shape impossible to comprehend. It's me, Isla realized, her heart freezing in her chest. It's the part of me I've hidden. The figure reached out a hand, or something like a hand, its fingers long and gnarled like roots of an ancient tree. Isla backed away, her mind reeling, but the figure followed, moving faster now, the shadows swallowing her with each step. You can never escape yourself, the figure hissed in a voice that echoed like 1,000 whispers. You are the darkness you've tried to outrun, and it will never let you go. Isla's breath caught in her throat as the figure lunged at her, its twisted hand grasping for her. She screamed and turned, running as fast as her legs would carry her, the sound of the figure's pursuit echoing in the labyrinth. The walls seemed to shift again, the ground beneath her feet trembling with the intensity of the figure's presence. The dark shape loomed closer, its laughter low and mocking. Isla couldn't outrun it, not here, not now. It was a part of her. She would never be free of it. And yet, she had to fight. She had to face it. Isla ran, heart hammering in her chest. But no matter how fast she pushed her legs, the shadows seemed to keep pace, as if the very walls of the labyrinth were conspiring against her. The dark figure, her own twisted reflection, pursued her, its hollow laugh echoing through the shifting corridors. Each turn she took, each desperate movement, led her deeper into the house, deeper into the maze of her mind. The walls pressed in around her, tight and suffocating, while the air grew colder, sharper. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning with the effort. She had to keep moving. There was no choice. If she stopped, she knew the figure would overtake her, swallow her whole. It wasn't just a part of the house. It was a part of her, an embodiment of the darkness she had been trying to outrun. But how could she escape something that was herself? I won't let it win, Isla thought, pushing forward, her hands scraping against the rough stone as she propelled herself forward. The labyrinth seemed to distort again, the passageways warping, the floor shifting beneath her feet. The ground trembled as the air grew denser, thick with the oppressive presence of the thing chasing her. The laughter, the mocking, cruel laughter, echoed louder now, vibrating in her bones. You can't outrun me, the figure called from behind, its voice warped and deep. I am you. You cannot escape yourself. Her pulse raced, and with a quick glance over her shoulder, Isla saw it again. The monstrous form, its limbs elongated and twisted, dragging itself toward her with unnatural speed. Its eyes were black voids, hollow and endless, staring into her very soul. She didn't stop running. Her legs were weakening, her body begging for rest, but she forced herself to keep moving. Her feet hit the ground harder, the sound of her footsteps, reverberating in the narrow passageways. Suddenly, the corridor ahead of her split into two. A choice, left or right. Either path could lead to her salvation, or deeper into the house's dark heart. Without thinking, she veered left, her hand brushing the wall to steady herself as she sprinted. But as she ran, the walls began to pulse, as though they were alive, and the temperature dropped even further. The shadows around her lengthened like fingers stretching out to grab her, pulling her deeper into the abyss. The air seemed to crackle with a strange energy, and she could feel the presence of the figure closing in behind her, its footsteps now louder, faster. It was almost on her. No, not yet. I won't let it take me. She pushed harder, the dark corridors blurring around her as she tried to outrun the growing weight of her fear. A flash of light suddenly broke through the darkness, so brief she almost missed it. Isla halted, heart pounding in her chest. The light had come from ahead. It was faint, like a distant flickering lantern in a darkened room. She couldn't see where it was coming from, but it was enough to give her hope. But as she moved closer, the light began to flicker and dance, casting strange shadows on the walls. The shadows seemed to grow taller, more menacing. The closer she got, the more it felt like something was waiting for her in that light. Please don't let it be a trap. Her mind screamed at her to turn back, but her feet carried her forward, each step heavier than the last. The shadows clung to her, whispering in her ears, urging her to stop, to give in. The figure was right behind her now. She could feel its breath, cold and sharp against her neck, and the sinister laughter grew louder with every passing second. Just as she reached the edge of the light, she saw it. A door, its wooden frame cracked and worn, as if it had been standing here for centuries. The door was not like the others she had encountered in the labyrinth. There was something different about it, a sense of finality. Without thinking, Isla grabbed the handle, the cold metal biting into her palm, and twisted. The door creaked open, and a gust of frigid wind blew through, sending chills down her spine. She had no choice. She stepped through. But when she did, she found herself not in another room, but in a vast, empty void. The door behind her slammed shut, and she spun around only to find that the door had disappeared, leaving her in a vast expanse of nothingness. The floor beneath her feet was smooth, featureless, stretching out in all directions with no walls or ceiling in sight. The air was still, suffocatingly quiet. There were no shadows here, no laughter, no whispers. It was as though she had stepped into a place beyond time and space, a realm where nothing existed but her and the silence. Where am I? Her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time since she entered Dreadmore House, Isla felt truly alone. There was no labyrinth, no darkness, no reflection of her past. It was as though the house had pulled her into a place where even it had no power over her. For a moment, Isla stood motionless, unsure of what to do. She looked around, trying to find something, anything, that would guide her. But there was only the empty void. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, trying to center herself, trying to fight the rising panic. "You're not alone," a voice whispered softly in her mind, barely audible, but familiar. It was her sister's voice. Isla's eyes snapped, open. "What? You're never alone," the voice continued, growing stronger, more comforting. "You've always carried me with you, Isla, and you will always carry me." Tears welled in Isla's eyes as she dropped to her knees, her hands trembling. She had been running from the truth, from the pain of losing her sister. But now she realized something. Her sister had never truly left her. She had been with her, in her heart, in every choice she made. The guilt that had haunted her had been a false weight, an illusion crafted by her own mind. For the first time in years, Isla felt a glimmer of peace, as though the darkness was receding. The weight in her chest, the suffocating guilt, was lifting. "I've been waiting for you to find me," the voice said, and for the first time, Isla felt no fear. The silence stretched out before her, no longer a void, but a space where she could breathe. The darkness around her began to dissipate. She realized the path ahead was no longer a choice between fear and escape. The house had been trying to show her something deeper, something that only she could understand. The labyrinth was gone. Her sister's voice had been a guide, not a taunt. And Isla knew in that moment she had finally begun to free herself. Isla stood in the void, the silence around her thick and all-encompassing. It was a silence that seemed to hold the weight of the universe, and yet it felt strangely freeing. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, the chill of the empty space seeping into her bones but not bothering her. There was no more darkness chasing her, no distorted figures looming in the distance, no taunting whispers trying to break her resolve. For the first time since stepping into the house, Isla felt a strange sense of release. "I've made it through," she thought. "I've finally faced the truth." But as soon as the thought crossed her mind, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. It started as a subtle vibration, the smooth surface of the void shaking gently, as though disturbed by some distant force. The air shifted, a faint pressure growing, squeezing her chest. The light around her flickered, and the comforting stillness began to feel uneasy. Something was wrong. A ripple ran through the expanse of the void. The air grew thick, dark tendrils of shadow creeping in from all sides. The soft, peaceful emptiness that had embraced her moments ago now felt like a prison, one she could not escape. The walls of the void pressed in, closing in on her, and she realized that the path she thought she had found wasn't the end. It was just another test. The shadows around her began to twist, spiraling like smoke, creating dark shapes that moved faster than she could track. They darted toward her, narrowing in on her, closing the distance with terrifying speed. And then, from within the shadows, a voice, louder now, called out, "You can never escape." The words sliced through the air like a blade, harsh and final. Isla turned, panic beginning to creep up her spine. The shadows were growing, becoming something more solid, more monstrous. They formed shapes, figures. Her sister, standing before her, but not the sister she had spoken to in her mind. This was a version of her, twisted, dark, eyes hollow and empty. "You thought you could face me, didn't you?" The shadow version of her sister hissed. "You thought you could erase me, push me aside, and leave your guilt behind. But it's never that easy. It's a part of you now, Isla. It always will be." Isla's heart pounded. This wasn't her sister, not in the way she had remembered. This was the part of her sister that had been lost, consumed by the house's darkness, just as she had been. She could feel it now, the intense weight of that loss, mingled with the overwhelming guilt she had tried to bury. The house had fed on that guilt, and now it was alive in front of her. The shadow figure moved closer, its form shifting and warping with every step. It reached out a hand, and Isla stepped back instinctively, fear seizing her throat. "You can never escape your past. You can never undo what's been done. We are bound together, you and I. Forever." The words wrapped around her like chains, pulling her toward the figure, dragging her into its grasp. She fought against it, her muscles straining. But the weight of the guilt, the sorrow, the horror of everything that had happened, it was all too much. The house had succeeded in twisting her memories, her emotions, and now it was suffocating her. "No," she cried out, her voice breaking. "I don't need this. I don't need you." She stumbled, falling to her knees as the darkness surged around her, a flood of memories and nightmares crashing into her mind. She saw her sister's face, saw the way she had died, saw the guilt that had torn Isla apart since that moment. The house had been feeding on that moment of weakness, that moment of failure, and now it was feeding on the broken pieces of Isla's heart. But something inside her snapped. No more. Isla gasped as a surge of power pulsed through her, a burning sensation filling her chest. It was like a light inside her pushing against the darkness. The house had tried to make her believe it was stronger than her, that the guilt she carried was insurmountable. But it wasn't true. The darkness wasn't invincible. It couldn't define her anymore. She stood, her legs shaking but firm. The shadows surrounding her flickered, their tendrils recoiling as though burned by the light that now radiated from within her. She reached out her hand, and the shadows recoiled further, the figures that had haunted her dissipating into the empty space. "I forgive myself," Isla whispered, her voice strong despite the tremor in her chest. "I let go." The darkness hesitated. The whispers grew quiet, the oppressive weight lifting just slightly. Isla felt a flicker of hope, a warmth inside her chest that was stronger than the chill of the void. She had taken the first step. The house could not control her anymore, not with the weight of guilt that had held her prisoner for so long. She had faced it, and now she was ready to move forward. The voice, her sister's twisted reflection, whispered again, but this time the words were different, more distant, more hollow. "You think you've won? But it's never that easy." And then, with a final surge of energy, Isla pushed forward, using all of her strength to send the darkness crashing away from her. The shadows shattered, crumbling into dust that disappeared into the nothingness around her. The figures, the twisted versions of her sister, vanished. The void, the oppressive silence began to break apart, cracks forming in the nothingness. She could feel the world around her beginning to shift again. She took a deep breath, the first real breath of freedom she'd taken in what felt like an eternity. The darkness was fading, and with it, the grip the house had on her was weakening. There was still more to face, more to uncover. But for the first time, Isla knew that she was no longer bound by the past. She had taken back control. With a final glance at the fading shadows, Isla began to walk forward, the path ahead uncertain but open, like a door waiting to be unlocked. Isla's footsteps were steady now. The crackling remnants of the dark void began to fade behind her, the air around her growing lighter, less oppressive. The house was still with her, its presence a constant undercurrent, but its power had diminished. Each breath she took was deeper, more filling, as though the very act of releasing the shadows allowed her to reclaim herself piece by piece. She was walking forward, no longer trapped in the house's twisted labyrinth of guilt and fear, and yet she could still hear the distant echoes of the house, still feel the pulse of its heartbeat beneath her feet. Dreadmore had not fully relinquished its grip. The walls around her shuddered as if holding on to some last shred of power, like a beast in its death throes, unwilling to let go. But Isla was done with it. As she moved through the once familiar corridors, the house seemed to change. The walls, once slick with decay, now appeared less solid, as though they were dissolving into mist. The floor beneath her no longer trembled with the malevolent force that had pursued her, but instead felt more like dust, ready to crumble to nothing. It was almost as if the house was dying. The thought was not comforting. If anything, it was unsettling. She had felt the presence of the house for so long, its grasp on her mind, on her fears, that to think of it crumbling away felt like the final end of something that had never fully existed in the first place. It had been a construct, a nightmare, made manifest from her own dark thoughts and unresolved emotions. And yet, it had been as real as the ground beneath her feet, the walls that surrounded her, and the reflection in the mirror that had tormented her. Was it possible for something, born of fear and grief, to truly cease to exist? Isla's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden light, a flicker in the distance so bright and pure it stung her eyes. She blinked, shielding her face, but the light grew stronger, more intense, until it swallowed the darkness entirely. She squinted, taking a cautious step forward. The light was coming from a door. A simple wooden door standing at the end of the corridor, bathed in golden warmth. It was like the first dawn of the world after an endless night. Her heart quickened. This door, it felt different from all the others. This was not part of the house, not part of the maze that had held her captive for so long. This was something new, something real. As she approached, the house seemed to groan around her, the walls groaning like the last breaths of a dying thing. She placed a hand on the cool surface of the door, and the moment her fingers touched it, the trembling stopped. The house seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for her to make a choice. Isla's hand tightened on the handle. She could feel the weight of everything, the loss of her sister, the fear, the anger, the guilt. It had all led her here, to this moment. She had survived the house's darkness. She had faced her own demons and released the grip they had on her. And now, standing at this threshold, she realized that the house had never been her true enemy. It was me. It always was. The revelation hit her like a wave. She wasn't running from the house. She had been running from herself, from the pain of loss and the fear of confronting it. The house had been a reflection of that fear, a place where she could no longer hide from the shadows inside her heart. But now, it was fading, its power spent, because she had faced what it had been trying to show her. The door was her escape. The light was her redemption. With a final steady breath, Isla turned the handle and pushed the door open. The light was blinding at first, too bright to see clearly, but as her eyes adjusted, she stepped through and into the warmth of the sun. Her skin tingled as she emerged from the darkness of Dreadmore House. She stood in a field, green and vibrant, stretching out before her like a never-ending horizon. The sky was clear, the sun shining gently, casting long shadows over the grass that swayed in the breeze. She blinked, taking it all in. It was real. She was standing in the middle of the day, of life, with no more darkness, no more fear. The house, Dreadmore, was gone. She felt its weight lifting from her shoulders, the oppressive, suffocating force it had held over her all this time evaporating like mist. And then, through the open space ahead of her, a figure approached. It was a woman, her sister. Isla's heart lurched in her chest, but this time it wasn't the shadowed reflection she had seen in the house. This was her sister, as she remembered her, full of life, her face bathed in the golden light of the white day. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling with warmth and familiarity. There was no guilt, no sorrow in her expression, only peace. "You made it," her sister said softly, her voice like a gentle breeze, warm and comforting. Isla stood frozen for a moment, a knot of emotion swelling in her throat. She wanted to run to her, to hold her, but something held her back. She had longed for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she realized the truth. Her sister had never really left her. She had always been with Isla, in her heart, in her memories, in the love they had shared. The house had tried to make Isla believe that she was lost, that the past could never be overcome. But it wasn't true. What she had with her sister was eternal, and it wasn't bound by the walls of Dreadmore House. Isla took a deep breath and smiled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words tumbling from her lips like a prayer. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I'll never forget you." Her sister's smile deepened and she nodded. "You don't have to. You never will." And then, as Isla blinked once more, the figure was gone, fading into the light that surrounded her. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of deep peace, like the final piece of her heart had been healed. As the light continued to shine down, Isla stood in the field, no longer haunted by the past. She had stepped out of the shadows of Dreadmore House and into the light of a new day. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a new beginning, and with the sun on her face and the wind at her back, she was ready to move forward. And so, Isla steps into the light, leaving the darkness of Dreadmore House behind. But her journey isn't over. What truly holds us captive? Is it the haunted houses or the shadows inside our hearts? Isla has faced her deepest fears, but is the struggle ever really finished? The darkness may have receded, but can we ever escape our past? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more thrilling journeys ahead. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Isla's journey? Was it the end, or just another beginning? Stay tuned for more chilling tales.